meet some of the
I would say the introduction is probably the most superfluous thing that could be done here, because I think everybody I'm looking at knows John Hollins as well as or better than I do. But I want to say a couple of things before I relinquish the mic, knowing I'll never get it back. I practiced law with John Hollins for 31 years, and it was absolutely the great privilege of my life to be able to do that. And when I joined him in the summer of 1976, I discovered that he had two clients that I'd never heard of before. And at the time, it meant nothing to me. And it turned out it was two of the biggest cases that I ever was involved in as a lawyer after 40 years. The first one was Eddie Shaw, some farmer from Shiloh, Tennessee, whom we later represented in a week-long fraud trial and were able to win that case. And the other one was Jeffrey Womack. Many lawyers practice their entire career and never have a case remotely like either Eddie Shaw or Jeffrey Womack. John Hollins had both. The fact that both of those exercises in legal work were successful is a tribute to John, his ability as a lawyer, his dedication to his client, and the fact that he was a great judge of young talent. Yeah, when he called me, I turned him down flat because one, it was less money, and two, I'd never heard of, you know, the idea of leaving the DA's office was just ridiculous. It was the most fun I had ever had in my life. And then Bob Brandt saw me on the street one day and told me what an idiot I was, and I called him back. And 31 years later, there you have it. But John Hollins was a member of the great class of 1957, Vanderbilt Law School. He went on to be an assistant city attorney, assistant district attorney, was kind of the go-to man under General Harry Nickel and later under Tom Shriver's brief term before he left to be in private practice all the time. And then, of course, formed the law firm that became known as Hollins Wagster in Yarborough in 1976. And I've left. Lou Connor was here earlier and said that he was leaving because he didn't want John to criticize him for taking me out of the firm. But I think John has long since gotten over that. But the story you're going to hear tonight is a story, quite frankly, of legal greatness. It's an exercise in something that few lawyers ever get to do, and that's the representation of a truly innocent client in the highest and most serious charge that we have, and that of first-degree murder. And to do that, and for that to last over a period of 30 years, is a monumental effort. So you're going to hear from a great lawyer and my great friend, John Hollins.
See if that's going to do it with me sitting down. Is in oh, yeah. My voice tends to carry. Maybe you move. I'll take that away.
I'll leave the courtroom too loud.
Yeah. It's in the book, you know, Bobby Jackson still calls me Hollering Hollins because my voice carries. And so I'm not going to try to turn it down anymore. Y'all will just have to bear with me. First, I want to start off by thanking Chris and Ashley. They're the ones that are really responsible for this event. I think somebody told me that maybe something off the law firm's website has been put on your chair, so you already know a little bit about me. But let me tell you a little bit more. I was raised here in Nashville. My family had been here just before the Civil War. I went to Aiken Grammar School, MBA Proprietary School, Vanderbilt University, and Vanderbilt University Law School. I retired on August 1st, 2011. after 55 years of law practice, primarily as a trial lawyer. As Ed told you, I was a prosecutor in city court from 61 to 63. I even tried some of the sit-in cases, which you read about from time to time in the press. I was at one time the senior partner of the law firm of Hollins, Wagster, Yarbrough, Weatherly, and Reagan. I've got a letter here. When I started practicing law, the best trial lawyers were Jack Norman Sr., John Hooker Sr., and John Connors. And I brought a letter here, and I'm not going to read through the parts that are favorable to me, but Jack Norman Sr. took an interest in me, and from time to time he would write me letters when I'd won a big case or for other reasons. And I'm not going to tell you about the parts that are favorable to me. I'm just going to get you into the letter, but tell you what he says about the practice of law. It's dated November the 19th, 1992. Dear John, and this, some of you will remember the Nashville Banner used to have a section where they had a profile that where semi-prominent people or reasonably prominent people were sometimes mentioned, and they had an interview, and they interviewed me, and they wanted to know who the best trial lawyers when I started, and I told them Jack Norman Sr. and John Hooker Sr. and John Connors. So this starts off with this letter. Dear John, I've read your profile in today's Banner, and I want you to know my appreciation of your kind references to our professional associations. Trial, and I'm omitting the parts that are favorable to me. Trial work calls for hard work, careful preparation, succinct presentation, and strict allegiance to the claims of a lawyer's client. You have acknowledged all of these, and as usual, it has paid off. There is no other profession that can give more satisfaction than the opportunity to be a trial lawyer, and this is really my favorite part. I loved every day of my 60 years in our courtrooms. As a matter of fact, as I now approach 90 years of existing life, I would give almost anything I have to get up tomorrow morning and go down to one of the courtrooms, one of our courtrooms, and try the meanest lawsuit on the docket. I think that a love of it would let me live to be 100. Again, I congratulate you on being recognized as a real trial lawyer. He was a great lawyer and a great man. I was president of the Nashville Bar in 1974. I met Jeffrey Womack for the first time the next year on February the 26th, 1975. I'd never met him before. I didn't know his parents, but you'll find out how he came to be in my office that next day. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but most of you know the story. Marcia Trimble was a pretty little girl, 9 years old, in the 4th grade at Julia Green Grammar School. She was selling Girl Scout cookies, and this was on February the 25th, 1975. And she left the house to sell Girl Scout cookies, but she never returned. She went by Jeffrey Womack's house to see if he wanted to buy any cookies, and Jeffrey didn't have any money, but he told her that his mother would be home soon, and he would get the money for the cookies and get it to her. She didn't leave any cookies at that time. Marcia was found 33 days later in the garage of John Thorpe at 5007 Essex Avenue. She was dead and had been strangled a short distance from her home. Marcia lived at 4009 Copeland. Jeffrey lived at 4102. Peggy Morgan, who will be mentioned later, lived at 4100. This was an upper middle class neighborhood here in Nashville. Like JFK's assassination on February the 22nd, 1963, many people in Middlesex remember where they were when they first heard that Marcia Trimble was missing. Ponds and lakes were dragged. Dogs were brought in from Philadelphia, search dogs, same search dogs that they used in the Patty Hearst case. They even brought in a psychic from Brooklyn to use his magic to find Marcia Trimble, but none of that works. Police officers, police cadets, hundreds of people searched the neighborhood for Marcia Trimble, but no one could find her. John Sigenthaler, the editor and publisher emeritus of the Tennessean, has been very helpful to me in writing this book, and as you will note, he wrote the foreword to the book. I'm not being emotional about my book, it's just that I have allergies this time of year. That's why I'm bearing my eyes from time to time. Oh, I guess I am emotional about the book too. And also I want to give tribute to Jackson Brown, who is a highly successful author, and himself, he gave me excellent advice. They both recommended Tom Wood, who's sitting next to Jeffrey, to help Jeffrey and me write the book. I want to pay tribute also to Demetria Kalabimos from WSNB-TV. She was very helpful. She did a documentary on this book that appeared at the Bell Court, and I think maybe at the Green Hills Theater and Film Festival, and it was very well received. On the night that Marcia Trimble died, February 25th, 1975, the police searched Jeffrey at the Trimble house. And as I recall, the Trimble bedroom. They questioned him repeatedly for about 3 hours. They acted like they didn't believe him, and so for the first time it appeared to Jeffrey that he possibly might be a suspect. When they searched Jeffrey, they found a condom, as I've said. Jeffrey had been having an affair with an older woman. He had some cuss words written on the side of one of his tennis shoes. After the detectives had been questioning Jeffrey for about 3 hours, Peggy Morgan, and Jeffrey's mother, broke in to the bedroom, barged into the bedroom, and Peggy Morgan told the detectives if they had more questions to ask Jeffrey, they could talk to his lawyer. Tony Jacobs, one of our villains in the book, asked who the lawyer was, and Peggy said John Hollins is his lawyer, even though I never met Jeffrey or talked to his family. Tony Jacobs' reply was, shit. I met Jeffrey the next day at my office, which at that time was in the 501 Union Building. I graduated from law school at 57 and had a pretty good bit of trial experience. Jeffrey seemed to me like he was telling the truth. At that time, however, in our law practice, and Ed will remember this, in a case like this, not only a big case, very important case, I had my clients given a polygraph exam, also known as a lie detector test. And then if they pass it, I would call on the state to give them one. And if they pass it, I'd try to get the state to agree to dismiss the charges. And that's a policy that I followed in this case. The polygraph operator that I was using at that time was a guy named Paul Ballinger. He's very good. And let me tell you what about polygraphs. If you got a good examiner, they can tell you whether or not your client is telling the truth. Okay, Jeffrey passed the exam that Paul Ballinger gave him, and then I called on Shriver to have his best polygraph operator give him a test. At that time, there was a detective named Noble Brymer, B-R-Y-M-E. And I knew Noble Brymer because I put him on the witness stand several times in criminal cases when I was prosecuting in criminal court. At that time, they still made good, but Metro had leased some space in the Stallman building. And maybe Jeffrey's mother and father with me, I can't remember about that, but at any rate, they weren't there.
They were there to solve that.
Okay, they were there. So after an hour or so, the door opened, Brahma came out, and he says, "John, the boy is telling the truth." It's interesting, and we didn't know this until we got a copy of the police file. And the reason we got a copy of the police file, there was another book written about this case called A Season of Darkness by Doug Jones and Phyllis Goble. And it referred to some documents that we didn't know existed. So Tom Wood did most of the legwork, but we called on him to furnish us with copies of the file. And you find out later that there'll be some conversation about some phone taps, and that's where we got copies of the phone taps. At first, the representative of the police department took the position that we weren't entitled to see any of that evidence until the guy who was convicted exhausted all his appeals. That was Jerome Barrett. And again, we sort of says that's BS, and if you don't give them to us, we'll file suit and get them. We had a law that made us believe we were entitled to them. So we got copies of them ultimately without having to file a suit. And we learned that the detectives and Dick Knudsen, who was the FBI agent who was working on this case, had gone back to Tom Shriver in 1990, 90 and 91, to try to get him to indict Jeffrey, and a full written presentation was prepared for them and submitted to Shriver. Shriver fortunately declined to do it, and this is in spite of the fact that I think in 2002 Shriver had issued a statement, maybe it was before that, it was in 1982. Shriver issued a press release saying that he thought it was a serious injustice to have Jeffrey arrested, and he believed Jeffrey had nothing to do with Marcia's murder. Despite that, they went back in 1990 and 91 to try to get him to indict Jeffrey again. Okay, Marcia's, well, let me say this first. While the detectives were trying to put Jeffrey in the penitentiary, there was a murderer and rapist that was active in Nashville, Tennessee, and his name was Jerome Barrett. He had raped one girl named Judy Porter, who was at Belmont University. He was later tried and convicted for that and received 60 years in prison, but he built his time and got out in August of 74. He also had killed and raped a Vanderbilt co-ed named Sarah Dupree, also the same month that Marcia was abducted on February. I'm going to read you the police timeline on that in a minute. And despite one sergeant, he actually went on Dimitri Kaladelos' show and said he tried to get him to look at Barrett, and they refused to do it. In this other book, Season of Darkness, they made a female detective named Diane Vaughn their heroine, and it's part of the record in the Barrett case that she told the detectives that they ought to be looking at Jerome Barrett. Why didn't they do it? I don't know. I guess you can get so convinced that somebody's guilty that you can't see anything else. Now, Marcia's killer had left semen on her blouse, and the detective, not the detective, but the FBI scientists, experts had found Jerome Barrett's DNA both on the Vanderbilt co-ed's bed clothing and on Marcia Trimble's blouse. They put, the FBI's got a system called CODIS. They put those two cases into the system and what fell out, Marcia Trimble's murder. It turned out there was a 6 trillion chance to 1 that the DNA found on Marcia's blouse didn't match Jerome Barrett's DNA. In 2007, Ed Yarborough left our office to become U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Tennessee. I think it was November of 07. Could have been another month, but I believe it was November of 07. He called me and he says, "John, are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sitting down." "What's up?" He says, "They have found Marcia Trimble's killer, Jerome Barrett." And that was quite a shock to me. It was, of course, it was a good shock. Teddy Bard interviewed me after the charges were dismissed the first time in about 1980. And on Teddy's show, one of the questions he asked me if I believe the killer would ever be found, and my answer to him was, I wrote about it. It's been so long, and that interview is also in the book at the end of the book. Even in view of all this, well, the DNA match hadn't been made yet, but in '79, without any word to me or Ed, when the detectives knew that if they wanted to talk to Jeffrey here, they wanted to take hair and blood samples, all they had to do was call me or Ed, and we'd bring them in. But that wouldn't get them a confession. So what they did, Jeffrey was living in an old building on West End Avenue, and the detectives with a assistant district attorney whose name was Pat Apel, who had shown a lot of interest in this case, and I guess wanted to build his reputation by getting a monster off the streets. They went to Jeffrey's home at 2 a.m. in the morning. wouldn't even give him a chance to put his shoes on. And there were 15 SWAT team members, the detectives, and Assistant DA Pat Apel. And the purpose of the 7-mile trip was trying to coerce a confession out of Jeffrey, but it didn't work. John Sigathorn never has believed that Marcia was in the Thorpe's garage the entire 33 days before her body was found. However, the state medical examiner at that time, Dr. Jerry Francisco, and the head of the body farm at UT, which studies people after they have died, both concluded she had been there the whole time, and they are probably right. In '79, when all this was going on, David Raymond, who was later my law partner, came with the firm in '86, and Scott Williams were senior assistant prosecutors in Tom Schreiber's office. Pat Apel came into Raymond's office one day and asked David if he would help him try the Jeffrey Womack case. And David says, well, I don't want to cut you off, but let me look at the file first. And David did look at the file, and he came back to Apel's office, and he said, Pat, you might have enough to get an indictment, but you sure don't have enough to get a conviction. And I can't help you with the case. And things were moving pretty fast, and the timing on it was amazing. Tom Schreiber issued a press release saying that he was bringing John Rogers back to try the Jeffrey Womack case. And Rogers had been an assistant in his office before, tried a lot of cases. He'd been an FBI agent. He came out in the afternoon battle. And Raymond tells all about it in the book. As soon as Pat Apel read the article, he either typed out or wrote out a letter of resignation, and went in and put on Tom Schreiber's desk and left town. And he's now prosecuting in another state, and he is quoted, he responded to Tom Wood's letter, and he is quoted in the book. All right, then with Scott Williams. That's what I don't need. Scott Williams was in the district attorney's office also at that time. And the only reason I'm going to read from the book is it's just too much for me to remember. But a detective, and this is set out in the book, came into Scott's office, and her name was Shirley Davis, and they started talking about the case. And Scott Williams asked, by the way, Scott Williams now is the United States Administrative Law Judge. Asked her 4 questions, 5 questions, but anyway, they're set out in the book. Do you have an eyewitness to the crime? No. Do you have any scientific evidence? Answer no. Do you have a confession? Answer no. Do you have an airtight circumstantial case? Answer no. Didn't have much of a case at all. Raymond did. Scott Williams did. A whole lot of people must have known it, but nevertheless, they continued to move forward. And there have been other cases involving wrongful convictions and wrongful or incorrect or erroneous profiles. In this case, Dick Knudsen, the FBI agent who was working on this case, did a profile of the case, and he said, look for a young teenager in the neighborhood. He didn't say a white teenager, but that was the implication. Later, after they went back in the case, and I think this was in 1991, the FBI did a profile in Quantico, Virginia, which is the place where all their chemists are and experts, and they did a profile and concluded about the same thing. The profiles in other cases that I'm going to discuss with you a little bit have led to a lot of trouble for the police department. It's just an educated guess, is all it is. And why they were so convinced that this had happened in the neighborhood, Ed and I still don't know. All right, let me tell you about some of these other cases. And most of you will remember these cases. You may not remember the exact names, but you remember what happened. The FBI did a profile on the Centennial Park bombing during the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996. And you might remember that there was a guy there that found the bomb and kept a lot of people from getting hurt. Well, the FBI concluded in its wisdom, in its profile, that this guy was a wannabe cop, and he really had let the bomb himself and wanted to receive praise for saving these people's lives. The bomb was actually left there by a guy named Eric Rudolph, who was an abortion objection killer, and he was later convicted. There was a Central Park rapist where a jogger was raped in Central Park. 4 of the men, I think they were all black, confessed. Later they found the real rapist by DNA in prison, and they were all turned loose. This is an interesting case. I'm sure all of you will remember, but you won't remember the man's name. Stephen Hatfield was a United States government scientist, and their profile theorized that he had, the FBI profile, that he had masterminded the anthrax attack. Even, I guess it's the late John Ashcroft, man who was Attorney General of the United States at the time, mentioned that. Of course, he didn't have anything to do with it. I'm sure you remember hearing about the West Memphis 3. Yeah, the West Memphis 3 all confessed. The 3 of them confessed. One got the death penalty, the next one got life in prison. They were accused, they confessed now, they were accused of killing 3 little boys in the Memphis area, West Memphis area, as part of a satanic ritual. DNA proved all 3 of them were not guilty. There was a soldier, Eddie James Lowry, you probably haven't heard about, was convicted of raping an elderly woman. He confessed to it in 81. He was not guilty. Another soldier had done it 20 years later. DNA cured him, cleared him. Jeffrey Womack from New York, a case almost on all fours. A 16-year-old boy confessed to killing a fellow student. This boy was 16 years old. His mother tried to keep the police away from him. They got him out of school and got him to confess to it. So later, they found that a serial rapist had done it again by DNA. University professor Byron Garrett, Virginia University professor, wrote a book on wrongful convictions, and he says that 16% of these cases, the defendants confessed. Well, people in general tend to believe that the police wouldn't arrest somebody if they weren't guilty. They believe that police officers never lie, but they do lie. And they believe that FBI agents never lie, but they do lie. They believe prosecutors never lie, but they do lie. And I'll talk to you about several cases. The leading case on that is case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court with this prosecutor. And he knew that this was not blood. Testified, got a state chemist testified blood on the defendant's short. The dark red stain on the defendant's short was blood when he knew it was red paint. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I think that guy was sentenced to death for his crimes, and later an opinion by Potter Stewart, so that case was reversed. There's a couple of cases that are not in the book that you might be interested in. One of them is the case of State versus Michael Morton. That's a Texas case, and he was convicted of killing his wife, and after serving 25 years in prison, he was freed, and it was determined not only that he didn't do it, but that the district attorney had withheld evidence showing the real killer, and the real killer has now been convicted. And it's interesting too, the district attorney was later appointed by Perry, the governor of Texas, to a judgeship, and now there's been a warrant issued for his arrest for failing to disclose evidence. And this is what to convict the real killer. And the legislature in Texas now passed a law that not only do you have to submit exculpatory evidence to the defendant's lawyers, you got to submit all evidence to them. I know that, well, I know some of you have probably read this book on Amanda Knox. She's the girl that was convicted in Italy of killing her roommate, stabbing her, and then the appellate court reversed it, and now they've reversed it again and want to try her again. The things that she says to me in that book that's most telling, I don't believe that she'd be extradited. No lawyer's going to let her go back to Italy to be tried again. But what she says, and what these people do in order to get confessions, they beat people up, they question them for hours and days, and they did that with her, and it was female detectives, and some of them were popping in the head a little bit too. What she says, and it makes sense to me, and I've often wondered about this, after a while, I couldn't remember what really happened. And then they were able to twist whatever they wanted her to say into the statement that they got her to sign. A lot of people think, many of you here probably think, that Marcia Trimble's killing was the most shocking murder in Nashville history. And maybe it was. But there were some other shocking murders in Nashville history. One was Edward Ward Carmack. Most of you don't remember who that was, but he was a former senator and the publisher of the Nashville Tenacity, and a father and son in 1908 killed him, shot him on the Capitol steps and killed him. And so why do people confess when they're not guilty? Like Amanda Knox, they question for days and days. Sometimes they're beaten. Sometimes they're taken into a small room. In one case, a defendant was taken into a 10-by-10 room and kept there for a long time. They're threatened, moved from place to place, sometimes even taken out of town, kept up late, and told they're going to get the death penalty if they don't confess. And it's amazing how many do confess under those circumstances. Some things happened in this case that never happened in any of my other cases. And one of them happened fairly early on in the case.